Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, on a mission to create remodeling experiences worthy of 5-star online reviews. See the difference at callmosby.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Last month, we recognized 100 years since the commissioning of historic Route 66 by talking about its legacy and notable stops along the highway. We were only able to touch on a small part of the route's history in March, so today we're back with another conversation about the Mother Road. Andrew Wanko is a public historian with the Missouri Historical Society, and he's with us now to talk about state connections to this iconic highway and more. Andrew, welcome back to the show.
Yes, thanks for having me, Elaine.
And we also want you to be part of this conversation. Do you have a cherished Route 66 memory? Perhaps a bit of memorabilia from past travels down the Mother Road? Share those with us by giving us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. You can also email us at talk@stlpr.org. Okay, so Andrew, making Route 66 was actually a kind of a fight, right? People had to really go to the table to make some arguments for it. Talk with us about that.
Yeah, so Route 66 is fascinating. When you think about the icons of America, you've got the Statue of Liberty, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Gateway Arch right here in St. Louis. Route 66 stands alongside those. People all over the world know this highway. But the number 66 actually is not the initial number, the first planners who wanted to make this into the most famous highway in the world. It was not the number they were actually looking for. They wanted Highway 60 when it started. So back in 1926, the federal numbered highway system was debuted across America. These highways connecting every single city across the country, they would be given numbers. The big roads stretching all the way from the Atlantic to Pacific coasts were supposed to end in zeros, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. These guys here in the Ozarks, folks like John Woodruff of Springfield, Missouri, Cy Avery of Tulsa, Oklahoma, they wanted to get the highway that was going from Chicago to Los Angeles and turn it into the most famous highway in the country, which obviously they were very successful at. But they initially wanted number 60 because they thought that's the one everybody's going to want. That's what they're going to remember. They're going to remember those numerals of 10. So they fought to get 60, and it was the governor of Kentucky who raised the flag and said, wait a minute, my state, I see Highway 50 running just north of my state and Highway 70 running just south. Shouldn't Highway 60 be coming right through Kentucky? Instead, he found it curving up to Chicago, and he filed a complaint with the Federal Highway Commission, and they ultimately stripped the number 60 away from the Chicago to Los Angeles road. So these guys, they were heartbroken. They had lost their great number. They were poring over the unused highway numbers, 62, that doesn't do anything. Nobody's going to remember 62. When for some reason one day, number 66, I don't know if it was the double sixes, the alliteration of how that feels kind of coming off the tongue, that jumped off the page at them. And at this meeting in April of 1926 in Springfield, Missouri, they sent a single telegram to Washington, D.C. saying, we prefer 66 to 62. And on that day, the most famous highway in American history was born.
Yeah, 66 definitely has a better ring than 62 does. Well, you just mentioned John Woodruff. This was someone from Springfield. But there was also someone, I think, who invented potentially the first bumper sticker?
Yeah, so 66, it's got these guys who were really trying to make this into a famous highway, people like John Woodruff. So he was one of the sort of the fathers of the road, along with Cy Avery in Tulsa. John Woodruff was one of the founders of the Route 66 Highway Association, and they had two goals in 1926. The first was to get Route 66 paved from end to end. It would actually take them 13 years to achieve that goal. It wasn't paved all the way through until 1939. But he also wanted to make this the most famous highway in America and get all of these businesses up and down the road on board with turning it into a site in itself. It was not just the road you were driving to get to other sites. It became the site you were there to see. So folks like that, they really caught on to what he was trying to do. And one of those folks was Lester Dill. Anybody who's driven up and down Interstate 44 today has certainly seen the Merrimack Caverns billboards. There are dozens of them still around. Lester Dill was the guy who bought the cave that he named Merrimack Caverns in 1935. And he realized he didn't have a whole lot of money for big fancy advertising or to do that much with this cave, but he had enough money that he could ask local farmers to paint on the side of their barns, "Come see Merrimack Caverns, Stanton, Missouri." By the 40s and 50s, he had hundreds of these barns all the way from Ohio to Texas advertising Merrimack Caverns. When people would get to the actual spot there, he would slap stickers on the back of their bumpers, whether they liked it or not. Just a real down and dirty sort of guy who was going to make people remember this attraction that he had on the roadside. He would come up with these fascinating ways to get it in people's minds that this was something they needed to see. It's Ozark ingenuity at its finest.
Mm-hmm. Now, Route 66, you've mentioned some of these independent businesses and unique spots. How did that come about? Was this a concerted effort to get people to set up along that route, or did it kind of happen organically over time?
It was a little bit of both. At first, you certainly did have these folks who were trying to make this road famous. John Woodruff famously wanted Springfield, Missouri to become the crossroads of the United States. He imagined these highways going all directions, Springfield becoming the center compass point of these highways going in every direction from all over. The Ozarks became pitched as the land of a million smiles, as a tourist destination. You had more than 15 million people living within a day's drive of the Ozarks in the 1920s and 30s. So all the pieces were there to make this highway very famous. But I think part of it is just when you look at where that highway goes, the different aspects of American landscape you get to see. You start in Chicago, right there on the lake in this big city. You come through St. Louis, 5 different Mississippi River bridges carried Route 66 into St. Louis across the road's lifetime. So people crossing the Mississippi River are seeing it for the first time. You get out southwest, the Great Plains, the deserts of Arizona. It's this wonderful sampler platter of the American landscape. So I think it had a lot going for it to help move it along, becoming so famous.
We heard from Joyce, and this listener says that we lived 3 miles off Route 66 on a modern dairy farm with registered Jersey cows, and whenever we went to town, it was our route. We took Route 66 on emergency trips to the veterinarian or to the co-op for feed and food, to church, to school, or to buy whatever we didn't raise or create ourselves. From 1948 to 1972, Route 66 was our lifeline. And Joyce adds, I remember leisurely drives as a small child and incredibly faster drivers in my teens as big cars with huge fins became the norm. It's very visually evocative here.
Yeah.
Sadly, those big cars zooming too fast down the highway at 70 miles per hour or more too often hit the curb and wrecked. By the time Interstate 44 opened, the mother road was locally called Bloody 66.
Right.
So
Absolutely. And that's part of the fascinating part about Route 66 is it is this road you can still go drive and see these places today, but it's also a moment in American history of us sort of growing up alongside cars. Cars are becoming no longer a plaything of the wealthy by the 1920s. They're becoming integral to all aspects of life. By the time you get into the 30s, 40s, 50s, every family has a car in their driveway. It becomes a part of American existence. And so you're watching Route 66 almost becomes a victim of its own success. It does a great job as a highway, but it is far too undersized for all of the cars that end up on the road. When I was working on the documentary about Route 66 that I made 10 years ago, we actually got to drive some of the original pavement from the 1920s. You can still see the concrete trowel marks from where somebody laid this by hand. It's 18 feet wide with no shoulder. That's for 2 lanes of traffic. So you can imagine these cars from the 50s and 60s, these enormous sleds of cars that weighed half a ton, barreling at you down this 18-foot wide roadway. It was extremely dangerous. And so I think tempering the nostalgia that Route 66 often has is there were downsides to this road too. It was easy to get lost. It was easy to break down, and accidents did happen.
We're going to take a very quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue our conversation with Andrew Wanko and the centennial of Route 66. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
Welcome back. We're talking today with historian Andrew Wanko about the history and legacy of Route 66 ahead of a weekend-long event next weekend at the Missouri History Museum. The festival will celebrate the 100th anniversary of Route 66 with a series of author talks and conversations with people who lived and worked along the route. That includes a panel discussion on the history of the Green Book, the essential guide that helped Black travelers find places, safe places, to stay, dine, and refuel during the era of segregation. Irv Logan and Elizabeth Calvin will be part of that conversation. They worked at their grandmother's Green Book-listed hotel in Springfield, Alberta's hotel. Our producer, Emily Woodbury, spoke with Irv last week, and he told her that working at the hotel helped expand his worldview.
I'm talking about a lot of people who were on the Chitlin circuit, which was all the entertainers and whatnot from those days, and the Etta Jameses, the James Browns, and Ray Charles. Of course, as a teenage kid like I was at that time, I wasn't quite interested in all of that, so much as I was interested in cars and hot rods and all that. But every now and then, somebody interesting would come through the hotel, and I would spend a little time talking to them. One of the memorable things was that the first time that I met a person of African descent from outside of the United States was a man from Colombia. He came to stay for a few weeks doing a job somewhere in the Ozarks, and he had to stay there, of course, because there was really nowhere else for him to stay. And I had a chance to talk to him. He had a different accent, and I asked him, so where are you from? He says, I'm from Colombia. And, of course, I thought he meant Columbia, Missouri. But he was talking about the country of Colombia. And I wasn't even aware at that time that, because no one ever taught us that there were African Americans, or I should say Americans of African descent outside of the United States. So that was an eye-opening conversation I had with him. That was my first awareness that some of what I had learned in school didn't cover all of the bases.
Now, Route 66 connected people living in Missouri to the world, as we've heard, and it exposed them to other parts of the U.S. Irv said Black travelers from coast to coast would come to stay at Alberta's hotel.
The Globetrotters came through, and they stayed there at the hotel, and that was the most wonderful thing that could ever happen for a kid, to be able to sit around in the backyard and talk to the Globetrotters and have them show me how to operate the spin on the ball and all of that. That was really something. And then Goose Tatum, who was one of the early stars of the Harlem Globetrotters, his wife stayed with us while he was there in Springfield in the hospital, incarcerated. And I would talk to the mom, about, she was originally from Portugal, and she grew up in New York. So it was really interesting to hear about New York, because other than the fact that it was on a map somewhere on the coast, I didn't know much about it because I never really met anybody from there. But she was able to share a lot about her experience in New York and all the different kinds of people and where they lived and how that all worked.
And Irv Logan added that living in Springfield, Missouri along Route 66 inspired a lifetime of working on cars as both a hobby and a career.
Our nursery school was right up behind one of the old mechanics there in Springfield, who was one of the early stock car racers. He was African-American, and he was the only one in the Ozarks that I knew about that was doing that. And as a nursery school kid, we used to look over the back fence from our play yard and watch him and his buddies working on cars. And I think that's where I got bit by the bug, because I still do it to this day. And Mr. O'Reilly of O'Reilly Auto Parts, he used to have the soapbox derbies up there in front of his shop on Traffic Way at that time. And so it was just quite an interesting upbringing.
Andrew, what does it mean to have Irv speak at next weekend's events?
Irv is one of my favorite folks in the world. I was amazed. I went to school down in Springfield for college, and when I heard his stories, this is something I never knew. I got very familiar with this city, but I never knew this side of it. Looking deeper into the story of things like the Negro Motorist Green Book, you realize Route 66 has a lot of different perspectives. I think it's a subject that oftentimes can even sort of drown in its own nostalgia. It has this reputation of being very friendly and welcoming, but that varied greatly based on who you were trying to travel this road. Today it's easy. We know where we're going because of the smartphone in our pocket. You can look up wherever you're headed and find 1,000 hotels, 1,000 options of what to eat. If you were a black person, a Jewish person, a LGBTQ person trying to travel this road in the 50s, 60s, into the 70s, you had to be very careful about knowing where you were heading. So the Negro Motorist Green Book was one of those ways. It listed all of these places that African-American travelers could find, places to stay, places to eat, places to even something as simple as using the bathroom was something you had to plan ahead for. For LGBT travelers, you had the Damron Guide, which was small enough. It was made to fit in the palm of your hand so that it could be easily hidden. These were places that were welcoming to gay travelers who were trying to get their way across the United States. All of these are very valuable and valid Route 66 stories that I think we want to shine a lot more of a light on, that this is a part of this road, its history, and the history of trying to traverse the United States as well.
We have Jay from Normandy on the line with a question about highway design. Jay, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Well, I want to specifically talk a little bit about the area between the two Pineys. That would be the Little Piney and the Big Piney. We had a cabin pretty close to there on the Gasconade, and anyway, there was a place we went called the Stony Dells, and wasn't that right in the middle, in between the two highways, before you get to like the Little Piney? Maybe you could talk about that. And the highway was very unique, a little bit beyond that, right before you get to Fort Leonard Wood, where there's still a very narrow pavement in parts of 66 that you can drive on right now.
Yeah,
Jay, thank you.
Absolutely. That was the last stretch of Route 66 in Missouri to be paved. It took all the way until 1932, so 6 years after they started. That middle section of Missouri, right around Rolla, sort of that area near Newburgh, Missouri, is where this resort that he's mentioning was actually located. It was called the Stony Dell Resort. It was the individual who owned this plot of land on the side of Route 66 literally pulled stones and rocks out of the fields around the area and built this 100-foot-long swimming pool that was fed by a spring. They say the water was 55 degrees year-round. He built a huge section of locker rooms and inns that people could stay at. The first guidebook to Route 66, Jack Rittenhouse's 1946 guide, says that Stony Dell had an on-staff justice of the peace because people would come there for weddings so often. This was a huge stopping point along Route 66. But as he mentioned, Route 66, oftentimes, we were talking earlier about how that early road was just 18 feet wide, and it would have to follow the terrain. So through central Missouri, it was extremely windy, and it would cut back and forth through those hillsides. Well, when World War II starts, the road becomes a road of war. It's the connection between Chicago and St. Louis and the huge industries that were creating all of the materials for, bombs and soldiers' rations and uniforms and boots and things. All of that was being shipped down 66 to California to be sent to the Pacific Theater of War. And the road actually had to be repaved to accommodate all of those military trucks that were trying to transport all of these goods. So in the 40s, they rebuilt Route 66 through that section of Missouri and made it twice as wide and much straighter, literally blasting through the hillsides in central Missouri. So when you drive it today, it can actually be pretty confusing because you have the original pavement from the 20s, the 1940s pavement, and then you have Interstate 44 that came 20 years after that. So there's three different sort of historic roads that at one point or another were Route 66.
Well, this gives some insight into why you would spend a whole weekend on the centennial of Route 66, and that's going to be happening at the end of this month at the Missouri History Museum. Andrew, what can people expect to find at this 4-day stretch of festivities?
Yes, so from the evening of April 30th through May 3rd, that entire weekend, we are having the biggest Route 66 festival happening anywhere in St. Louis. We will have a historic classic car show out in front of the Missouri History Museum. Inside, we'll have more than a dozen relit neon signs from the roadside that have been restored on display inside the museum that people can come see. If you want to learn about the deep history of this road, we're having author talks from some of the top authors, folks like Joe Sonderman right here in St. Louis, who's been covering Route 66 history for decades. We'll have Irv Logan and Elizabeth Calvin talking with YouTube stars Anthony and Malaya Love, where they'll be talking about their channel Traveling While Black, where they're talking about navigating roadsides, both in the 1950s and 60s with Irv and what that's like still today. We'll have all of these fascinating talks and programs. We have a neon restorationist who's going to get into the science of how neon signs work. We'll have a talk about women operating businesses along Route 66's roadside. All of these things, all of them free to the public, so you should make plans to be there across that whole weekend.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, last 30 seconds, what is the legacy of this decommissioned highway?
I think the incredible thing about Route 66, if you drive on the interstate today, it's a known quantity. You're going to go 70 miles an hour. Anything interesting is going to be at least 100 feet away from you on the side of the highway. If you drive Route 66, you're going to wind through these towns. You're going to see things. People are going to be 5 feet away from you on the sidewalks. You're going to understand these places in a way that the interstate just cannot possibly offer. So it's the slow road. It'll take you a little longer, but it's worth it.
Andrew Wanko is a public historian at the Missouri History Museum. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
The museum will host a weekend-long festival celebrating the 100th anniversary of Route 66 from April 30th to May 3rd. More information can be found at mohistory.org/festival. And to play us out of today's show, here's a song from Sweetie and the Toothaches, who will kick off the weekend's events with a performance at the museum on Thursday evening. This is Fired Up off their 2024 album of the same name.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.